So I was grabbing coffee with a friend of mine recently. Let's just call him David.
Okay.
And David is a really sharp guy. He works in high-frequency trading, and he is, I mean, obsessed with market efficiency.
Right. The ROI guy. Every dollar has a job.
Exactly that guy. For the first 20 minutes, he's basically lecturing me on ROI and how you should never, ever pour capital into an asset that doesn't yield a return. He sounds like the most disciplined investor you've ever met. Mm-hmm. But then, the conversation lulls for a second. He pulls out his phone.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. And he opens Instagram. And I'm just watching his whole demeanor shift. He's not looking at market data anymore. He's scrolling through the profile of this girl.
A girl he's dating.
No, that's the thing. Someone he's never actually taken out, just, someone in his extended social circle. Mm. And she'd posted a pretty, standard mirror selfie.
Okay.
Without even blinking, David hits like, types out a comment with a fire emoji, and then he even replies to her story.
So he's going all in.
All in. And I had to ask him, I said, does she ever actually respond to any of that?
The $1 million question.
And he got a little sheepish and just sort of muttered, well, no, not really. But she likes the comments sometimes.
Wow.
The contradiction was just staggering. Here's a man who wouldn't dream of wasting a single cent on a bad stock.
But he's aggressively spending his most finite resource, his attention, on something with a 0% yield.
The 0% yield. He was acting like a beggar, just inflating the value of an asset that had no interest in him. It just struck me right then, he wasn't just wasting time.
No, he was actively participating in a form of hyperinflation. He was printing the very currency that was destroying his own value in the marketplace.
Exactly. And that anecdote, that really sets the foundation for this whole deep dive, doesn't it?
It's the perfect microcosm. We're going to look at how that exact phenomenon extends across all digital social spaces and how we started treating attention as this non-monetary currency.
Invisible currency.
The invisible currency. And its reckless, almost compulsive expenditure is causing a kind of hyperinflation in the dating and sexual marketplace. It's creating these massive market distortions that really, they impact everyone.
The parallel is just so immediate. David, the high-frequency trader, was behaving like a completely irrational consumer when it came to his own attention.
He was paying the highest possible price, his focused cognitive capital, for an asset that delivered zero tangible return.
Zero.
And that's the economic core of the problem, that lack of return for the giver, combined with this perception of infinite supply for the receiver.
So our mission today is what, exactly? To unpack this whole system.
Pretty much. We're going to analyze the behavioral economics of digital validation, look at the mechanisms inside dating platforms, and then dissect some of the sociological frameworks.
Like sexual market value and hypergamy.
Right. All these things that are being used and often distorted to explain these huge shifts in gender dynamics. We need to figure out the true cost of all this free attention.
Okay, so let's unpack that core economic concept first. The invisible currency. Historically, if a man wanted a mate, the exchange was, well, it was material, right?
Oh, absolutely. It was land, livestock, protection. Later, it became capital and social status. It was a trade of hard assets for, ultimately, reproductive opportunity.
But you're saying the modern trade is different.
It's fundamentally different, and that's the tragedy of it. We've sort of established that attention has become this primary currency.
Right.
Men are trading their finite, valuable attention, their likes, their DMs, their comments, the time they spend just watching stories, for basically nothing more than a fleeting hit of female validation.
And the key part, the part David was missing, is the yield.
The yield is zero. Zero sexual return on investment. The giver is spending capital that could be used to build himself up, and the recipient consumes it without any need to reciprocate in a meaningful way.
So if attention is the capital, and it's being spent so freely, that brings us right to this idea of an illusion of inflation.
Yeah.
Why does the average person, and let's just use the market lingo, someone who's maybe a 5 out of 10 in a real-world local community, why do they suddenly behave online with the mate selection standards of someone who is, objectively a top-tier 9 out of 10?
It's because their digital persona is artificially inflated. Think of it like a stock that everyone is just pumping with hot air, regardless of the company's actual fundamentals.
Okay.
The average woman is fed this endless, completely free supply of attention from countless anonymous men. These are the individuals we're calling digital orbiters.
Your friend David.
Your friend David was a classic digital orbiter. This constant, cost-free stream of validation becomes her perceived sexual market value, her SMV, and that creates a massive, unstable market bubble.
And this isn't just a small market fluctuation. This is creating what you call a catastrophic supply and demand mismatch.
It's a total breakdown of market logic.
So if the underlying value of the asset, the woman's actual appeal in a serious long-term relationship context is, let's say, a 5, but she's receiving attention equivalent to a 9, her standards just inflate to match that attention she's receiving.
Exactly. When you have this massive, uncoordinated supply of free male validation flooding the market, the perceived price, which is the woman's mate selection standards and expectations, it inflates far, far beyond reality.
So the woman who is objectively average now gets so much digital worship, hundreds of likes, dozens of DMs,
that she psychologically believes it.
Yeah.
She internalizes the belief that she deserves a top-tier partner who can offer status, resources, and commitment all at the same time. This is a behavioral economic distortion on a societal scale. It's shifting the entire baseline of expectations upwards, especially for women.
That shift in baseline is it's crucial. How does this compare to, say, 30 or 40 years ago, before all this mass divitization of our social lives?
Well, we can apply the long tail theory here. It's usually used in e-commerce, right?
Yeah, to describe how niche products can collectively make up a huge part of the market.
Right. So in mating, the long tail refers to reach. In the pre-digital era, a woman's SMV was determined by a pretty small local pool, maybe 50 or 100 eligible men in her immediate social and geographical sphere.
Her validation was finite, and it came from people who actually knew her.
Exactly. It was grounded in reality. But now, in the digital age,
it's global.
It's global. Social media and dating apps allow even low SMV women, the average profiles in that long tail of the distribution, to access a level of validation that was historically reserved for maybe the highest status women in an entire nation, not just a small tribe.
They're exposed to a global pool of attention,
which gives them the feeling of being highly desirable on a scale that is completely unprecedented in human history.
Wow. So if we try to translate that digital data back into evolutionary or psychological terms, that mundane mirror selfie that gets 200 likes, what is that actually signaling to the recipient's brain?
On a primal evolutionary level, that volume is interpreted as 200 males in my tribe are signaling interest and competing for my attention.
Even if the interest is completely superficial.
It doesn't matter. The sheer volume warps her perspective. It makes the competition seem incredibly intense, even if it's all transient, non-committal, low-effort attention. The constant flow fundamentally shifts her perception of her own relative status.
And here's the paradox, right? That massive validation, that constant stream of attention, it seems to breed disinterest, not interest, in the guys providing it.
It absolutely does.
You mentioned a biological mechanism of disdain. What is the root of that? It seems so counterintuitive.
It's a profound twist. The easily acquired high-volume attention triggers a subconscious mechanism of disdain for the very crowd that's providing it. The receiver subconsciously ranks herself above the crowd of admirers.
Why?
Because the supply is so huge and so easily acquired that it signals low value on the part of the givers. If 200 men are immediately and consistently available, they're seen as resources that require no effort, no chase to obtain.
In the brain's internal calculus, anything that's easily obtained is inherently less valuable.
That's the devastating logic of it. Which brings us to what we can call the simp economy.
When people hear simping, they usually think of money, right? Sending cash to online streamers or something.
And that's a part of it, that's monetary simping, but that's a niche activity. The vast majority of this economy, the one David was part of, operates on a different currency.
Non-monetary simping.
Exactly. The expenditure of DMs, comments, likes, views, hours of cognitive focus. These validation providers are essentially working for free. They're using their most non-renewable resource, their attention and their time, to build the receiver's ego and social proof.
They're paying with cognitive capital for what? The slim chance of recognition.
And often getting no response whatsoever. It's a terrible investment. And psychologically, this expenditure of free attention has a reverse effect on the giver's status.
How so?
It operates directly under the premise of what's known as Brifault's law.
Which states what?
The law basically states that the female determines the conditions of any association between the sexes, and if she derives no benefit from the male, no association occurs.
So by giving attention away freely and constantly,
you signal that you are a low-value, easily acquired resource who is willing to give everything for nothing. You've already leaked your value the moment you clicked like on the 100th photo. You've given away the very thing you should be making scarce.
So the digital orbiter provides the attention, which boosts the woman's SMV. But in doing so, he actively lowers his own SMV in her eyes. It's a self-defeating loop.
That's precisely right. And this makes the giver background noise. This is the mechanism of reverse preselection.
So they're not even potential partners. They're just data.
They become merely statistical proof of the woman's desirability, a data point in the denominator that validates her high status. When she looks at her 200 notifications, she doesn't see 200 potential dates.
She sees 200 men she has already mentally discarded,
but whose attention she can leverage to justify her extremely high standards.
This all sounds like the complete opposite of traditional status signaling. In the real world, scarcity creates value.
And that brings us to the alpha logic, which dictates the opposite behavior entirely. The high-status man, the hypothetical Chad, or just any man who is successful in the dating market, is often defined by his attention scarcity.
He doesn't follow, doesn't like.
It sometimes doesn't even know she exists.
Yeah.
And that absence, that scarcity, creates anxiety, curiosity, and intrigue. It triggers the pursuit circuitry in the receiver. The lack of free validation makes him a high-value resource.
So the digital orbiter's flood of free attention signals desperation and low status, while the alpha's absence of attention signals competence, focus, and high status.
It's the difference between being a readily available, mass-produced commodity and being a limited edition asset. The market is just fundamentally distorted by the availability of this free, worthless currency.
And the individuals printing the currency are the ones who suffer the most from the resulting inflation.
They are paying the market to disqualify them. It's an unsustainable economic and psychological dynamic.
And the problem is compounded because, as David's anecdote showed, there's that micro-reward. She liked his comments sometimes.
Yes.
That tiny, inconsistent reinforcement is often just enough to keep the engine of free validation running.
That variable reward schedule is an incredibly powerful psychological trap. And it's a key component of how these digital systems operate, which, leads us directly into the realm of dating apps.
Okay, so let's move from the general social media landscape to the apps that are specifically designed for mating. The sources really highlight how the platform's evolution has profoundly warped their original function.
It's a huge pivot. These apps shifted from being tools that were supposed to facilitate offline encounters, getting people into the same room, to systems that instead prioritize match accumulation for revenue.
That pivot is so critical to understanding why dating feels so frustrating for so many people. The primary metric of success for the platforms.
Yeah.
It used to be, at least in theory, a successful long-term couple.
Right. But in practice, the central activity just became accumulating matches and endless swiping. We have data that shows that even before 2020, over half of users reported not actually going on in-person dates despite using the apps all the time.
And that percentage was even higher for women, right? Why was that?
Because for a pretty significant portion of female users, the primary motivation shifted. It went from securing a physical date to securing validation and a boost in self-worth.
The act of swiping and getting matches is the reward in itself.
It's an instant ego boost, a quick confirmation of desirability. And you don't have to do any of the hard parts, the conversation, the logistics, meeting up offline. The apps became a source of social confirmation, not a logistical tool for dating.
And this immediately creates a huge gender disparity in engagement. I've heard it called the 99+ matches, but a spark ain't one phenomenon.
That's a perfect name for it. Women, especially in high-density urban areas, are just inundated with matches. The sheer volume makes selection difficult, if not overwhelming.
It's choice paralysis, the paradox of choice.
Exactly. Quality selection gets undermined by sheer quantity. Meanwhile, men are on the complete opposite end of the spectrum.
They get very few responses.
Which leads to frustration, and crucially, it leads to them resorting to purchasing expensive paid features. Subscriptions, super likes, booths, anything to gain a limited priority over the non-paying members.
So the men become the primary revenue stream? They're the frustrated, underserved demographic on the app.
And they're paying to overcome the very inflation that they themselves created through free validation on social media.
Wow. That is the perfect summary of the irony.
It is. Men consistently form the largest group of paid subscribers to these apps. And this financial reality, this heavy reliance on male subscription fees, it drives the platform's entire strategy.
The business model incentive.
Right. Many of these major dating apps are owned by publicly listed companies. They are singularly focused on maximizing shareholder profit, not on your love life.
But if the app is too successful, they lose a paying customer. That's a huge conflict of interest.
It's the central flaw of the entire model. A successful offline match that leads to a long-term relationship means losing 2 subscribers and losing revenue. So unlike social media, which thrives on engagement, dating apps thrive on perpetual seeking.
So the app is economically motivated to keep its paying customers, mostly men, as long as possible without actually delivering the desired outcome.
The system is designed for maximum user time, not maximum user success. It's a rigged game.
So how do they keep people playing without them just giving up entirely?
They employ what we call the casino strategy. They've completely gamified the process. It invokes gambler tendencies and increases addictive, compulsive behavior.
Like a slot machine.
Exactly like a slot machine.
Yeah.
The match has to be strategized to be just enough to keep you coming back. It maintains a flicker of hope, but it's not so high that you actually achieve your goal and leave the ecosystem.
It's that variable reward schedule in action again. You get enough dopamine hits to maintain the addiction, but the grand prize is always just slightly out of reach.
And this leads us to the conjecture about harmful algorithmic throttling. If the business model demands that users stay single and frustrated,
is the technology actually designed to ensure that frustration?
The sources outline a very strong conjecture that sophisticated AI tools are being deployed not just for matching compatibility, but explicitly to maximize subscriber revenue.
So the algorithm is actively working against you?
It's hypothesized to result in algorithmic and natural throttling of the mutual acceptance process. For instance, the algorithm might deliberately show a highly desirable profile to a paying user only after they've purchased a boost. Or it might intentionally limit the exposure of attractive people to average users to maintain that desire for paid upgrades.
So the system acts as a deliberate bottleneck.
Yeah.
It's using AI to control hope.
Exactly. And this throttling drives increasing frustration in men who see their efforts and their investment constantly hitting a wall. And this, in turn, negatively impacts their psychological well-being.
The irony is that this approach is probably a fallacy for the companies in the long run.
It is. The collective frustration will eventually lead subscribers to abandon the platforms, to churn, and find other ways of dating. So the pool of paying users will shrink over time. It's a very short-term revenue gain at the expense of long-term user base health.
But this isn't just a business problem, is it? The sources suggest this entire dynamic is connected to a growing mental health crisis.
It absolutely is. The heavy reliance on these apps, especially with frequent and prolonged use, has been linked directly to higher rates of depression and anxiety in a number of cross-sectional studies.
It makes sense. The cycle of high effort, low reward, and constant perceived rejection. It must be detrimental to your self-esteem and your mood.
It is. And the scale of anxiety and depression we're talking about is massive. Data suggests that these disorders now affect a huge portion of the U.S. population. Some estimates put it at 34.2%. They're the most common mental health disorders.
So you couple that widespread psychological vulnerability with a dating system designed to exploit insecurity and frustrate connection.
And you have a major public health issue on your hands, and there's a downward spiral here.
What do you mean?
Well, the symptoms of anxiety and depression, things like withdrawal, social awkwardness, lack of motivation, they further impact your social skills. They make forming healthy, stable relationships even more difficult.
So a person relies on an app for validation. They experience rejection, which increases their anxiety.
Which makes them less effective in real-world social interaction, which pushes them back onto the app where the cycle just repeats itself. It's a severe downward spiral.
The sources seem to suggest this whole situation warrants regulatory action from governments. Is the argument that this behavior is so manipulative it should be treated like gambling or, predatory financial practices?
That's the core of the argument, yes.
Right.
Given the documented negative impact on mental health, particularly among young men, the sources suggest an urgent need for intervention.
So what would that look like?
The argument is that match throttling and these pay-for-advantage models should be disallowed to ensure fair conditions for all users. It's about protecting the psychological profiles of people who rely on these platforms for social connection. If the technology is intentionally designed to prolong frustration and monetize psychological distress, it moves beyond being a simple market service into the realm of a public detriment.
Okay, so before we dive into the digital ideologies that try to explain this market, we should probably go back to the academic roots. We've used terms like mate selection standards. Let's ground this in sociology. What is hypergamy?
Sociologically, hypergamy is simply the practice of marrying a spouse of higher social status. It's marrying up. And hypogamy is the inverse, marrying down.
And these are concepts that have been documented across cultures and throughout history, right?
They have. And the reason we're discussing them is that so many of the perceptions about dating standards in the digital age are rooted in, or at least claim to be rooted in, these ancient sociological and evolutionary dynamics.
And globally, researchers have mapped out pretty consistent cross-cultural mate preferences. What do the big studies, the ones that survey people across dozens of countries, what do they tell us about what men and women prioritize?
The findings are remarkably consistent. They show both universal and gender-specific preferences. Universally, both men and women favor attractive partners. That's a given.
But the differences are what drive the market dynamics.
Exactly. The differences are pronounced. Men tend to prefer women who are young, which is often linked biologically to fertility.
And for women?
Women consistently tend to prefer men who are rich, well-educated, and ambitious. These are all indicators of resource acquisition and status potential. The evidence for this is overwhelming.
You mean from specific studies?
Yes, there was one seminal study that covered 37 different cultures. In every single one of those samples, women rated good financial prospect and ambition and industriousness higher than men did. This is a preference that really seems to transcend local cultural norms.
So even if we remove the digital context completely, those preferences for status and resources are just deeply embedded in human mating behavior.
They appear to be.
Does this tendency for income and status persistence hold up even now? In the era of female financial independence?
It does. The drive for women to marry men with higher incomes than themselves persists in the modern era, although the magnitude of that difference may be narrowing in some places.
And it's important to clarify that hypergamy demands higher status, right? Which is often correlated with income, but isn't limited to it.
That's a crucial point. The man doesn't necessarily need to be older, only to have higher social standing, greater competence, or a more promising trajectory than the woman.
I often hear people say that modern couples are looking for social equals. How does that fit with the persistence of hypergamy?
Well, when sociologists talk about social equals, it typically means shared social circles, educational backgrounds, similar cultural capital. It doesn't mean strict economic parity.
So a woman might be a high earner herself, but she might still seek a man who is a higher earner or holds a higher status position within her field.
Exactly, thereby continuing the pattern of marrying up in status, even if the absolute income gap is shrinking.
So if the preference persists, are we seeing any changes in the actual prevalence of hypergamy?
Oh yes, significant changes, largely driven by socioeconomic factors and autonomy. We've seen a pretty significant decrease in hypergamy in various Western nations, like in Britain since the 1950s, particularly the practice of women marrying older men.
And that decrease is directly linked to modern socioeconomic dynamics.
Right. It's linked to women having greater financial autonomy through higher education, better employment opportunities, and legal protections.
In other words, if a woman can provide her own resources and security, the economic necessity that once reinforced hypergamy starts to diminish.
That's the idea. The necessity may diminish, but the evolutionary or psychological preference can linger, and that's where the market gets very complicated.
And this brings us to a theoretical mathematical rationale that some behavioral economists and evolutionary psychologists have proposed to explain why this preference is so sticky.
That's right.
Tell me about this mathematical rationale. What is the fundamental cost that women incur in mating?
The theory posits that female hypergamy might occur because women incur a greater lost mating opportunity cost from monogamous mating. Biologically, women have a slower reproductive rate and a much more limited fertility window.
So if a woman commits to a partner who turns out to be low quality or incapable of providing resources,
she has wasted years of her limited reproductive window. The stakes are biologically much, much higher for women when they're selecting a long-term mate.
So they must be compensated for this inherent biological cost of marriage and commitment.
And that compensation often manifests as selecting a partner who demonstrates higher status, reliable resource acquisition ability, and general competence. It frames the choice as an evolutionary strategy to maximize fitness return, given the high biological investment costs of bearing and raising children.
And this foundational preference, when you filter it through the lens of digital inflation we discussed,
it leads directly to the extreme expectations we're seeing today.
Okay. So we've looked at the academic cross-cultural evidence for mate preference, which is rooted in sociology and biology. But there's this parallel digital ecosystem, that has taken these ideas, hypergamy, SMV, and built an entire, often confrontational ideology around them.
You're talking about the manosphere.
Exactly, the manosphere.
Which is this loose network of online communities. It includes groups like men's rights activists or MRAs, men going their own way, MGTOW, and involuntary celibates or incels.
And they're all united by what? An anti-feminist, masculine perspective.
Largely, yes. The guiding philosophy is often called the red pill, which views heterosexual sexual relations strictly as a marketplace governed by sexual market value, or SMV. They're essentially taking academic concepts and turning them into prescriptive rules for action and for their worldview.
And in this red pill structure, how is SMV formally defined? And what's the key difference between the sexes?
Within their structure, SMV is defined by very rigid, separate criteria. Female SMV is primarily a combination of beauty and fertility. It's about assuring successful reproduction. The value is seen as largely inherent and very time-sensitive.
And male SMV?
Male SMV is a combination of beauty, but crucially combined with socioeconomic status. That's what assures survival and resource provisioning. The key difference is that female value is seen as passive and temporal, while male value is seen as active, something that must be earned and built over time.
And this leads to the central organizing principle of their dating market, the alpha-beta dichotomy.
Yes. They impose this strict hierarchy among men based purely on sexual success. Alpha males or chads are at the top because of their sexual access. Betas are the next tier down, often characterized as men who are good providers but lack sexual success.
Which is summarized in their foundational motto.
Alpha fucks, beta bucks.
Can you elaborate on the mechanism of this dichotomy according to the red pill view?
Well, this view argues that because of evolutionary pressures, women are inherently inclined toward promiscuity to secure the best genes, a concept they misapply from biology.
Okay.
They claim women exploit men by having sexual relationships with alphas for superior genetics and sexual ability, while at the same time extracting financial, emotional, and committed resources from betas.
So the beta is seen as powerless, relegated to trading non-sexual resources, time, money, security for limited or conditional intimacy, but never true attraction.
He becomes the perpetual digital orbiter we discussed earlier, except in this framing, he's paying with a lot more than just his attention. He's the provider, the safety net, the secondary choice. He's the background noise that funds the lifestyle while the alpha reaps the sexual rewards.
The advice they give to men, however, suggests that this status isn't fixed. They promote the LMS law. What does that stand for?
LMS stands for look, money, and status. And the prescriptive advice is that a man's SMV is not fixed at birth, but can be increased by improving these three components.
So look would be fitness, grooming.
Right.
Maximizing your facial structure. Money is obvious, financial success. And status is social dominance, competence, a successful career path. The whole philosophy hinges on the belief that if a man maxes out his LMS, he can transcend his current beta status. Let's focus on the L for a second. This is where the ideology tries to masquerade as hard science. They assert that beauty is objective and measurable, often on a 1 to 10 scale.
Yes.
How do they attempt to prove this objectivity?
It's one of the most interesting and most pseudoscientific elements. Their proof involves taking distorted scientific results like studies where the certain facial morphs were consistently rated as beautiful across test subjects and then presenting them as ironclad empirical facts. They attempt to objectify beauty using specific mathematical metrics.
What kind of metrics are we talking about here?
They cite concepts like the golden ratio, specific interocular distances, or jaw-to-cheekbone ratios. They try to apply these measurements to determine a numerical ranking for a person's face.
So they're literally measuring the distances between the eyes and noses of celebrities like Johnny Depp and Brad Pitt to create a template for perfect male symmetry.
They are. It's an intense prescriptive effort to create these rigid, quantifiable rules for attraction. It strips the concept of beauty of all subjectivity or personal preference.
Sounds incredibly reductionist, but I guess the appeal is that it offers men a sense of control over what seems like a totally arbitrary process.
That is precisely the appeal. It substitutes the anxiety of uncertainty with the false certainty of an algorithm.
And this whole philosophical structure, it culminates in a very specific view of controversial power dynamics. What's the ultimate claim they make about who holds the power in modern heterosexual relationships?
The claim is that gender power dynamics have been completely overturned by feminism and socioeconomic shifts. They believe that women are now absolutely in charge. They believe women possess what they call sexual power, that grants them economic, professional, and social benefits while simultaneously placing men at a massive disadvantage. They assert that men are victims of biological needs they cannot satisfy unless they are high LMS men, which leads to widespread male suffering.
So the male struggle is entirely externalized. It's caused by women's power. It completely overlooks the hierarchy of masculinities maintained by men themselves or societal issues that have nothing to do with gender.
That's right. The focus is never on male self-reflection or broader societal structures. It's always placed squarely on female hypergamy and female sexual control.
And this ideology often pushes for specific solutions or external outlets. What are some of the observed ideological positions regarding, for instance, prostitution?
Within some of the sub-communities of the manosphere, prostitution is often framed not just as a service, but as a men's right. It's seen as a necessary tool to rebalance this perceived sexual power between men and women.
And some groups take it even further.
Some do. They advocate for state regulation of sex based on a non-discrimination principle, the idea that no man should be excluded from intimacy because of his looks or status, forcing an artificial equalization of the sexual market.
And we have to address the most extreme claims within this worldview, including the minimization of violence. How is something like sexual violence framed when women supposedly hold all the sexual power?
Within this specific ideological framework, which you often find in the most extreme corners of the manosphere, rape is sometimes framed as the negative side of having a higher sexual power.
That's a horrific perspective.
It is. It's an attempt to minimize the harm of violence by treating it as an inevitable byproduct of this female-dominated market they describe. Furthermore, they often minimize the statistical relevance of violence against women compared to male suicide.
And how do they frame male suicide?
It's often interpreted as men regaining control or making a rational choice in response to what they see as women's extreme and pervasive power over them. This is a classic example of an ideology that selectively utilizes data to support a predetermined conclusion of male victimhood.
It's really crucial to step back and look at these frameworks from an objective, academic standpoint. When you place the manosphere's claims under academic scrutiny, they display every trait of a post-truth society. It's pseudoscience and cherry-picking.
Absolutely. They mix complex, cutting-edge, but often purely hypothetical, science-like, obscure findings in evolutionary psychology with personal narratives, anecdotes, and sexist tropes. And they create this aggro-truth that just sounds scientific.
The hypothetical nature of evolutionary behavioral science is just completely obscured.
Routinely, they take a concept that might be one explanation among many, and they present it as immutable law.
And the bias is so clear. The evolutionary lens is applied almost exclusively to women to explain and condemn their behavior, but rarely to men. A prime example is the misuse of the dual mating strategy.
Oh, definitely. The dual mating strategy hypothesis is a complex idea in evolutionary psychology, suggesting that females might secure investment from one man, the long-term provider partner, while obtaining fitter genes from an affair partner.
The short-term, high-status male.
Right, and the manosphere appropriates this concept entirely and directly into their alpha fucks beta bucks acronym. They claim it's cold, hard proof that female fidelity is a myth.
What's the fundamental intellectual error they're making when they do that?
They are conflating ultimate evolutionary strategies, which describe unconscious, aggregated, long-term evolutionary processes, with conscious, proximate behavior.
So they conclude that women are actively plotting and scheming to maximize their fitness by deceiving men.
Exactly. When the reality, as suggested by the original research, is far more nuanced, it acknowledges cultural constraints, individual variation, and the profound role of conscious choice.
This brings us back to that pervasive sexual double standard. If they're so obsessed with evolutionary psychology, why is there a total omission of any discussion regarding male sexuality and its own evolutionary underpinnings for short-term mating?
Because male propensities for short-term mating, the desire for multiple partners, the lower bar for casual sex, are viewed as natural, biological, and unproblematic.
They're just acting on their nature. There's no moral judgment attached.
None whatsoever. But female sexual assertiveness is viewed through this highly moralistic, judgmental lens.
So if a woman is sexually assertive, she's condemned using these moralistic, misogynistic terms, calling women brainless primates or cheating whores.
Precisely. The same evolutionary explanations used to describe male behavior as normal are twisted to depict this monolithic, inflexible view of female biological behavior that must be controlled or feared. It's a mechanism for moralizing the market they claim to be merely describing.
And for the men who buy into this, it actually creates new hierarchies and anxieties among themselves. It leads to intergender effects and fatalism.
That's the most damaging internal consequence of it all. The black pill ideology, which is prevalent among incels, reinforces a sense of absolute fatalism.
How so?
It asserts that genetics and biology entirely determine your dating and relationship success. They override all other factors. Since your look is fixed, if you are deemed a low LMS man, this rigid worldview dictates that success is impossible for you, regardless of your effort.
Which would naturally lead to despair and resentment.
It creates a sense of profound powerlessness. While the red pill at least tries to offer a path to improvement through LMS, the black pill often leads to this resigned despair because it suggests the game is rigged from birth. The only perceived solution is to retreat or to focus the resentment outward.
So if we look at the broader societal cost, far from offering empowerment or practical solutions, this ideology seems to just trap men in a cycle of isolation.
It absolutely does. The manosphere's aggrieved culture, which externalizes all romantic and social failures, isolates men. By focusing exclusively on external factors, women's power, hypergamy, the tyranny of objective look, rather than promoting healthy masculinity or emotional intelligence or self-reflection,
it actively cuts off the chance of any healthy connection.
It creates a self-fulfilling prophecy of loneliness and resentment. The ultimate cost is that the men who adopt this worldview end up suffering more psychological distress than they started with.
Because they stop viewing connection as a mutual endeavor and start viewing it as a zero-sum transaction that they are mathematically destined to lose.
Exactly. They are trading real-world opportunities for a toxic, high-resolution map of their own perceived inadequacies, believing it to be a map of reality itself.
So what we've really seen today is the fundamental distortion of the modern dating environment. It's a market where the free currency of attention has become hyperinflated, and the platforms are economically incentivized to maintain that inflation for their own revenue.
And the central choice that's derived from all these sources is whether you're going to continue to be a payer in a rigged system, a digital orbiter providing free attention to inflate the standards of people who don't even know you, or if you're going to become an observer and a potential investor.
By redirecting that finite cognitive capital inward.
Exactly, to build real value in the tangible world.
You should remember this final warning. Every second you spend scrolling, liking, and simping for digital crumbs is capital expenditure with zero return. It's a brick stolen from the foundation of your own future empire. The goal is to position yourself to harvest reality when the collective delusion of validation and inflation inevitably corrects, focusing your scarce, valuable attention on assets that actually deliver tangible ROI.